Hey YouTube, how's it going? Kevin Cleary here with a knife video for you. And just by way of introduction, I want to remind you guys, if you're not on the Facebook page, you might want to check that out. I'll put a link in the description box. I plan to, I'll post videos up there, some discussion stuff, and I'll probably even throw up, hey, if there's a sale coming up, or if there's, a video that I think people might be interested in, such as the survey video that should be posting this week. So if you're watching this and are interested in the survey video, that will be coming here shortly in the next few days. I'm just processing some data right now. Anyway, let's get back to focusing on this very cool Ferrum Forge knife. This is the Ferrum Forge Archbishop. Now this guy was a model from 2016, very popular model, and I think there's good reason for it. The size, the shape on this guy, the blade shape is very well done. Even the finishes, this one happens to be green with some really nice looking bronze standoffs there. Really nice looking knife. And so I think there's a lot of good reasons that this is a popular model. Now, Ferrum Forge, they do, a lot of really cool knives. I think their current sort of focus is, the current model that's sort of out there and getting some attention is the Master Blaster. But typically they do a good job. And this knife is certainly in their wheelhouse, like much of the other stuff they do. You've got some fairly hefty titanium scales, thick blade stock. Overall, the level of quality and fit and finish is very well done, and all of those things are going to be typical for Ferrum Forge knives. They are doing a really good job, and if you're into overbuilt knives, these are heavily built, hard use type of tools, and they do a really good job of that. So when we get to comparisons, I will try to have some other knives that kind of fit into that similar category. Let's go ahead and get into some of the specs and some of the features. And there's a lot of little stuff going on here, guys. So this might take a little longer than we're used to, okay? Now, size and weight is gonna be pretty straightforward. This guy is 8 inches overall. The blade length is 3.5 inches. The handle length is 4.5 inches. It's 1/2 inch thick. Now, it's not a big knife, and certainly in hand, it doesn't feel like a big knife, even though it does have some pretty hefty sort of overbuilt components. It certainly feels fairly slim and light. And it carries that way as well. The pocket clip is single position, does work very nicely. And I haven't said the weight here. The weight on this guy is 4.8 ounces. So that's a little hefty for its size. Consider this guy's only 8 inches long. But when you take a look at the components, look at that huge piece of 20 CV steel, full titanium construction, the weight kind of makes sense, okay? So all of a sudden when you start looking at the individual pieces, just the blade alone, look at how much metal is involved in that, okay? So that explains the weight, and 4.8 ounces is not too heavy to carry by any stretch of the imagination. It's actually quite comfortable, and this knife is particularly comfortable because of its slightly smaller size. All right, now let's go ahead and start with the blade. The blade is one of my favorite things about this knife. It's got that really, really heavy stone wash finish on it, sort of an acid wash. Very, very nice blade design with this fairly full belly. Reminds me of, a lot of ProTech knives where they've got this sort of constant belly coming up here. And there are a lot of other knives that have that as well. Very thick blade stock, okay? Almost 3/16 of an inch. It's 175 thousandths here. The cool thing about this is, and the reason this knife performs as well as it does, is this guy's only 20 thousandths behind the edge. So it's a very thin edge, making this a really, really nice slicing knife. I've got to give a lot of credit to that. It is a challenge, guys, and it's one that I appreciate when a knife maker gives me nice thick blade stock like this, which I do love, especially if you choke up on this knife. I can get, I've got a big flat piece of metal, so I can get my thumb way out here and still be very, very comfortable cutting and even doing really some hard cutting tasks. So I've got to say that's a real win. And to get this knife to still slice well is an achievement as far as I'm concerned. So if you're if you don't know by now, I'm definitely a fan of this blade. It is a flat grind, and I guess maybe I would, me, I would kind of prefer a hollow grind on a blade like this. That would, I don't know, it would make it cut well, but the problem with a hollow grind on this blade could possibly be that it would hang up a little bit right here on where the primary bevel starts, okay? It would make that transition a little more abrupt if you did a hollow rather than flat ground blade on this. Nice big cutout, and I think it works. I have adjusted the detent a little on this, but if you watch, yeah, I can still spider flick this. So it's nice that you have that opening hole as well cut out of that blade. And since we're kind of talking about action, let's make that transition now. And the action on this guy is very, very good. Let me kind of flip this a couple times for demonstration. This action is really, really well dialed in, and there are a few reasons for that. So let me quickly go through some of those with you. I want to get a little bit detailed here, so you may have to bear with me. But first off, of course, you can see the stainless steel lock bar insert. You can see the detent ball in there. Now, this detent ball is really, really cool because with this screw right here, you can actually adjust how far that detent ball kind of comes out. And we've had this discussion before, but essentially with a detent ball, you've got like a ball and a cup, and you can actually adjust then how deep that detent ball is going to drop into the hole, and therefore how stiff the detent is going to be. And I adjusted it a little bit the other day and have it right where I like it. Maybe you would get this and want a slightly softer or slightly harder detent, and you could make that adjustment. So that design innovation, I guess, comes from Jake Hoback on his knives, and they have borrowed it and brought it over to this Ferrum Forge Archbishop. So really, really well done on that. But that's not the only thing that they've done a good job on. It's going to be really tough to show you, but I think you can see, let's see, if you look in there, right there by the tip of my finger, see where my finger's moving around here? You can just barely catch that this blade also has a detent track. So the purpose of that is so that when you get to this point, so right here is where the tang of the knife wants to catch on the detent ball, and it doesn't do that because of the fact that there's a detent track cut in to allow for, or a detent ramp, I guess would be the better way to put it, cut into that blade to allow for the detent ball to just ride up onto the blade nicely. Again, really, really nice little touch there. Great attention to detail, and very, very impressed with that. The other thing that's cool about that is notice how difficult it was for me to show you that track in there. It took me a few minutes. It felt like it had one, and I was like, yeah, when I first got this, I was playing with the knife, and I'm like, it definitely has a detent track, but why can't I see it? And it just took me a little while to figure out. So they've done a really nice job hiding even some of the cool things they've done here to make it work as well as it does. One last thing that I want to point out here, and this is something I really appreciate, but does take some extra work. Notice the relief cut here. If I look at it from there, it looks like there's quite a bit of material. They've actually thinned it out further. So instead of just making the relief cut in from this direction, cutting out the material they want and moving on with life, they've actually milled it like that so that they can leave sort of a wall here and make it more of a relief hole, which adds some strength. Think of like a steel I-beam where it's thin in the middle with the two sides. They've kind of designed this to function in a similar way where you've got a cross member kind of forming a shape like this, adding a little extra strength. And again, I think that's a great touch. Sometimes I've had people complain about the stiffness on Ferrum Forge lock bars. Not so with this guy. Very, very comfortable, easy to access. Absolutely no issue with that whatsoever. And I didn't show you this, but you actually can. You can see, I think maybe I did when I talked about the blade, but you can flip the knife open with sort of a spidey flick. Again, great touch. Now, moving on to the handle construction, I've got to say, very nicely, milled titanium construction. Here's one of the things about Ferrum Forge. They tend to do a few different variations. So maybe you like this handle, and maybe you don't like this handle, but you love the shape of the knife. There are a number of other sort of versions that you'll see available. And some of them, with every model, they seem to do about 20 sort of maker's choice knives where they just go crazy and do something weird with the handle construction and with the overall aesthetics of the knife. Those can be a little hard to get, but they do present a very cool option. So that's the handle sort of aesthetics. This one happens to be green with some lines milled in. You can see the Ferrum Forge maker's mark. Come on, there we go. You can see the Ferrum Forge maker's mark over here. Let's talk about the ergonomics. And this is one of the things that I'm maybe not totally crazy about. This knife feels very small in hand, and I would have almost wished that this portion back here were just a teeny bit thicker. I mean, it doesn't have to be a lot thicker, but just a little bit would give me just a bit more confidence. Now, that's from back here. If I move up here, this feels amazing. This is just perfect. The ergonomics here, absolute total win. Just when I'm back here on the full handle, though, I feel like the handle is just a little small. And maybe not everyone has this problem, by the way, but you know, it kind of puts me in mind of something like a Benchmade 940 where there's just not a lot of substance to the handle. Okay, and this is of course still much bigger, heavier, bulkier than a 940, but it just kind of gives me that impression where the handle, you know, almost doesn't feel like there's enough of it there to really engage my hand the way that I want it to. Single position pocket clip, and this of course is a spring clip. There's a couple scratches on that just from carry and use. So ergonomics on this I think are overall very good. It's a little, what I would say slight maybe would be a good way of phrasing that. So it would be nice to have just a little bit more. The other nitpick I'm going to give this is because essentially this is perfect, right? Like there's nothing wrong that I can point to and say, yeah, they messed this up or they messed that up. Some internal milling on the titanium there to lighten this up a little would, I think in this case, be appropriate, all right? Because this is a fairly small knife. And so, you know, one of the reasons we look to a smaller knife is because, you know, it can be a little bit lighter. So if they could get this down closer to 4 ounces, I think that would be very, very well appreciated. The clip works well, and in fact these two big screws on the clip here, I forgot to mention this, but they do present a really nice sort of pinch point when you're pulling the knife out of pocket. I find I use those screws not only to kind of locate the knife, but then to extract it as well. So let's see here. When we talk about the handle, the construction is very good. Don't know if I showed you those very attractive bronze backspacers. Just in case I didn't, there's another look at them. They are really, really nice. Really good touch. But yeah, very comfortable in hand, especially comfortable in the choked up position. A little bit too slight for me, but probably there'd be some people, you know, if you love the 940, that's one of the things that kind of puts me off from the 940 is that the handle just feels too small in hand. Anyway, overall, really, really well done. Let's get some comparisons before I give you my sort of overall take on the knife itself. Okay, what have I got that, okay, here's a knife. As soon as I got this, as soon as I flipped it, held it in hand, I was immediately reminded of the Lion Steel Kerr. Similar size, similar sort of design philosophy, sort of a small, thick, overbuilt knife. Obviously the Kerr is going to cost far less, but you're also not getting a lot of those little cool features that we've been talking about here. If you like the sort of finger choil construction, there's obviously the hinderer, which again, it's overbuilt. There's a lot of sharing between these two knives, and again, you get that nice finger choil, which I'm really a big fan of. Now, one knife that to me deserves to be compared to this has got to be the Curtis F3. Now, this compares more closely, I would say, to the medium Curtis F3, but the large F3 is fine as well. Okay, now one thing I will say that the Curtis maybe does a little bit better is the hollow ground blade I do prefer, and the way they grind this tip is, or the way Dave grinds this tip is very, very tough. So if you compare the two of these blades, you can see that the Ferrum Forge is a little finer at the end than the Curtis. If that's something you need. And of course, this is the same, the tip of the grind is the same as the medium F3 would be. So that's a consideration there. Something else, you know, that's pretty high end, but in a very different way. And I bring this in more for contrast, okay? Both of these, you know, they're very well built. They have a very high degree of fit and finish. This is a little more refined, I would say, than the Ferrum Forge. However, the Ferrum Forge, I would say, is probably, it's a knife I would feel a little better with in my pocket than this guy. I tend to baby this one just a little bit because I like it so much, but because also the finishes are a little finer than the Ferrum Forge. Finally, let's get to, I know the Lion Steel was a little bit of a budget option, but this is not the ZT that I would want to compare to this, but something like the new 0920 or the 909 would be, you know, something that if you're interested in this knife, you may want to look at. Even the 0900, I would say, is much smaller, but still pretty interesting. Let's throw in a couple of others. This is the Real Steel Megalodon, and this one I kind of bring in to be a placeholder for the Real Steel S571 Pro, which is a very, very nice knife. That where the blade shape kind of reminds me of this, and of course it's at a much more budget-friendly price point. Finally, if you like the ergonomics on this, the steel wheel cut jack is now there, and there will be a higher end version in M390 steel, but the cut jack reminds me of these ergos where it's reasonably small, you know, right around 8 inches, does have that front finger choil allowing you to choke up on it. Of course, these are not, this would be the very most budget friendly sort of comparison. So what is my overall take on this knife, guys? I have to say this is very well done. It's a cool looking knife, aesthetically, artistically, it's a total win. The features you're getting on this with the Holbeck rolling detent and the level of sort of thought process that has been put into each of the components, the great flipping action, plus the size and even construction and finishes on this knife come together to make this a great high-end EDC blade, something you could carry all the time. It's certainly small enough, light enough to do that, and yet still very capable. So I've got to say the Archbishop to me is a real win from Ferrum Forge. I don't get the opportunity to check out a lot of Ferrum Forge stuff because the way these guys work is, you know, once they're done with a particular run, they're done. And if you don't get one at the time, you could be totally out of luck. So I was pretty happy to get my hands on this one and be able to check it out. Really, really nice knife. Very well done, as is pretty much everything that I've ever looked at or handled from Ferrum Forge. I think that the Archbishop is definitely a win for them. Hope you enjoyed the video. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will talk to you soon.